She built a second channel that almost nobody in her audience knew existed. She branded it, named it, filmed it, and ran it, entirely separate from the channel that made her famous. And then, just as quietly as she started it, she walked away from it. That woman is Melissa Morgan, the co-creator and one of the original faces of Outdoors with the Morgans, a channel that turned firewood, tractors, and Pennsylvania farmland into one of the most loyal rural communities on the internet. And the story of what really happened to her is nothing like what the comments section spent years speculating about. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just where Melissa went, but why what she did says something that most women building careers inside shared YouTube channels never get the chance to say out loud. Rural Pennsylvania, summer 2016. A couple who actually lived the life they were filming decided to turn a camera on it. Mike Morgan wasn't building a content strategy. Melissa wasn't positioning herself as an influencer. They just had land, animals, equipment, and a lifestyle, and they pointed a camera at it. The channel launched in July 2016 with no roadmap, no production crew, and no algorithm plan. Just the work itself, documented the way the work actually happened. What viewers found immediately was that this was different from most outdoor content. There was no performance in it, no dramatic music swells, no host explaining how hard something was while someone else did the hard part. Mike narrated the work directly. Melissa showed up in the frame the same way she showed up in real life, lifting things, driving equipment, processing firewood in the Pennsylvania cold, and doing it without commentary about how impressive it was supposed to look. That absence of self-consciousness became the channel's identity before anyone had named it as such. The Morgan property became the setting for a catalog that covered nearly every dimension of rural living. Firewood was the core, and it became almost a trademark. Mike's firewood processing videos developed a meditative quality that viewers returned to again and again. Not because anything dramatic was happening in them, but because watching skilled, unhurried work is a specific kind of rest that a certain audience had been searching for without fully knowing it. The sound of a splitter working, logs stacked into clean rows, the rhythm of real physical production, it became comfort viewing before comfort viewing was a recognized category. But Melissa's presence across that content was never decorative. She wasn't there to hand Mike something or smile at the camera between tasks. She was working, carrying the physical weight of the channel right alongside everything else she carried in the actual day-to-day life being documented. That distinction mattered more than it appeared to in the early years, and it would matter in ways nobody could have predicted later. By the time the channel had been running for 2 solid years, it had developed something rare in the rural YouTube space, a community that felt like neighbors, not fans. The comment sections weren't full of debate or hot takes. They were full of people describing their own wood piles, their own tractor troubles, their own land and animals. The Morgans had built the kind of audience that mirrors itself in the content it watches. People weren't just watching the Morgan property. They were watching a version of the life they were already living, or the one they had grown up inside and missed. Melissa was a central reason why that mirroring worked, because she was recognizably part of the actual life being documented, not a host managing a presentation of it from a safe distance. The channel grew without manufactured drama, without controversy, without a viral moment that changed everything overnight. It grew because the work was real, and the people doing it were real, and there is a specific and sizable portion of the YouTube audience that has been waiting years for something that doesn't ask them to suspend disbelief. And if you think that foundation was just good fortune, the next chapter is where the real work began. The nickname didn't come from a marketing meeting, it came from the comments section. Viewers started calling her Mighty Melissa organically, an acknowledgement that what they were watching wasn't a woman making occasional cameo appearances in her husband's channel. Melissa was stacking wood, operating UTVs, loading repurposed IBC totes with firewood, and participating in the physical labor that defined the channel's content week after week. The nickname stuck because it was accurate. She earned it the same way you earn any name that stays, by doing the thing the name described, consistently, across a long enough timeline that people stopped thinking of it as exceptional and started thinking of it as simply who she was. What made this significant wasn't just the physical presence, it was the context in which that presence existed. Rural and outdoor YouTube in the mid to late 2010s was overwhelmingly male. The channels building real audiences were built around men with equipment, men with land, men harvesting or hunting or constructing things. Women appeared in these spaces, but rarely as the recognized second anchor of a channel with genuine traction. The structural assumption of that world was that women were visible but peripheral. appreciated by audiences, but rarely centered by the format itself. Melissa changed that dynamic without announcing she was changing it. She didn't frame herself as making a statement. She didn't build that identity into the channel's brand or position herself as an exception to the prevailing pattern. She just worked. And the audience responded to that authenticity the same way they responded to everything else on the channel, by showing up week after week, year after year, and telling other people to do the same. The Morgan family became part of the story in a way that felt earned rather than engineered. 4 children, Hunter, Levi, Kate, and others, appeared across the content as they grew. The channel wasn't performing a family narrative, it was documenting one. Viewers watched kids who had been children become teenagers. They watched a property that had been developed over years continue to be worked and improved. By the mid-2020s, those children were adults. The family had expanded, and the Morgans had become grandparents, a milestone the earliest viewers had, without realizing it, been watching the whole family move toward across nearly a decade of continuous content. The weight of that history, all of that loyalty, all of that shared time, is what makes what Melissa quietly did next so worth paying attention to. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got. Until now. Around 2020, something changed in Melissa Morgan's relationship with her own work on YouTube. And it didn't happen on the main channel. Melissa launched Morgan's Off the Leash, a separate YouTube channel branded under the acronym MOTL, subtitled America's MOTL Life. The channel description made her identity explicit from the first line. She was Melissa Morgan, originally from Outdoors with the Morgans, but what followed that acknowledgement was entirely her own creative territory, and it looked almost nothing like the channel her existing audience knew. The content covered ground the main channel never touched. Melissa filmed real-time gym workouts, not highlights or montages, but actual sessions showing the full arc of training. She documented trail walks with the family dogs, capturing the daily outdoor rhythm that gets lost in content focused on machinery and production output. She filmed travel, including a trip that took her through Las Vegas and on to San Diego and Coronado, California, a sequence that showed a completely different register of her life. She captured family time, holiday moments, community service projects, and the personal milestones that don't fit into a video about equipment maintenance. There was also a series called Meet the Morgans, a structured, interview format introduction to each family member. It was the kind of content that treats people as subjects in their own right, rather than supporting cast in a larger operation. That framing was not accidental. What this represented, taken together, was something rarely discussed in coverage of the Morgans. Melissa was operating as a content creator in her own right on that channel. Not a co-host, not a supporting presence. She was making editorial choices, what to film, what story to tell, what version of her daily life to share with an audience that was finding her specifically rather than finding her as part of something larger. She was building an identity centered on fitness, outdoor activity, faith, and the texture of everyday life that had never made it into a firewood video. Most people who follow the Morgan story stop here, but the real story starts right now. By late 2021, the upload frequency on Morgan's Off the Leash began to slow, and then it stopped. No farewell video, no announcement, no pinned comment explaining the decision. The channel simply went quiet, the way projects sometimes do when the person running them has reached a conclusion that doesn't require a public statement. This is the part of Melissa's story that deserves more sustained attention than it has received. Because the question worth asking isn't only what happened, it's what the timing reveals about the decision she made and what she understood when she made it. Running 2 channels simultaneously is more demanding than most viewers recognize. By 2021, Outdoors with the Morgans was not a casual hobby channel. It was a growing operation with multiple revenue streams, affiliate relationships, a loyal community requiring consistent quality, and the continued physical demands of the property it was documenting. Melissa wasn't just appearing in those videos, she was living the life they depicted. Every hour of content on the main channel represented actual labor on the land, with animals, equipment, wood, and family, not camera work and editing sessions. Real labor, real seasons. Adding a solo channel to that workload, one with its own creative direction, its own filming schedule, its own audience expectations, was genuinely ambitious. And the content she produced on Morgan's Off the Leash was not passive or low effort. Real-time gym sessions require consistent commitment to produce on a regular cadence. Travel documentation requires planning and execution. A structured family interview series requires coordination, filming, and editorial attention across multiple episodes. None of that happens by itself. When the decision came to stop uploading, it was almost certainly practical rather than personal, made from experience rather than defeat. Something had to give. And what Melissa appears to have chosen was the original thing. The channel that had always been the core. The partnership that had always been the foundation. The property and family that had always been the actual point. That choice came just before the main channel faced something that would have tested anyone's resolve to stay. In August 2024, Mike Morgan uploaded a video with a title that would have stopped any longtime viewer mid-scroll. The equipment had been repossessed. The video was as direct as everything else on the channel. Kubota machinery and land pride attachments. Equipment that had featured in the channel's content for years. Equipment viewers had watched work that property across multiple seasons were taken back by the financing company. The arrangement had ended. The machines were gone. What stood out was how the channel handled it. Mike didn't hide it, frame it vaguely, or build a cliffhanger around the revelation. He filmed it. He gave it a clear, honest title. He walked through what happened the same way the channel had always addressed its own material. He noted at one point that he felt a measure of relief, a response that said more about the pressure that equipment debt had been applying than the loss of the equipment itself. When losing something feels like a relief, that thing had been costing more than it was worth. For viewers who had been watching for years, the video landed differently than most content on the channel does. It was a window into the financial architecture of a rural operation that had always appeared self-sufficient on camera. The reality that equipment financing had been part of how that operation functioned, and that financing had become unsustainable, was a detail the channel had never made explicit before. The transparency that defined the Morgans' approach from the beginning held even when the subject was difficult. Melissa was present throughout that period. The channel continued uploading. The family continued working the land. Nothing went silent. And by August 2025, the recovery was documented concretely on camera. An $85,000 Ford F600 dump truck, purchased for the Morgan business, and featured in a video with the matter-of-fact presentation that has always been the channel's signature. A business that had lost its primary equipment fleet in 2024 had rebuilt to the point where a six-figure commercial vehicle was part of the operation 12 months later. That kind of turnaround doesn't happen passively. It happens because the people running the business kept working. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What she did instead is the part nobody talks about. By 2025 and into 2026, Melissa Morgan is still exactly where she was when this story began. On the Morgan property in Pennsylvania, working alongside Mike, and still appearing in the content they built together. That continuity is the fact most coverage of the Morgans treats as obvious or buries entirely. But it's the most important fact in the story. Melissa didn't leave. She didn't disappear. The years of comments asking where she was, the searches for what had happened, the concern from longtime viewers who had watched her work in cold weather and carry real physical weight, all of it resolved into an answer that's almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. She was there the whole time. What changed is the context in which that presence can now be understood. The Morgans' Off the Leash experiment wasn't a departure from the main channel. It was a test. Melissa was doing what thoughtful people do when they've spent years as one half of a shared identity. She was finding out what she looked like when she was the only one in the frame, what her creative instincts were without the anchor of the primary brand, what her relationship with an audience felt like when that audience was finding her specifically, not finding her as part of something larger, what her daily life looked like when she was the one deciding which parts of it were worth filming. The answer she found, based on where she is now, appears to be that the original thing was the right thing, not because the solo channel was a failure. It built its own community, produced content that is genuinely distinct from anything the main channel ever made, and proved something about her creative capacity that had been implicit but never fully visible before. But because the story she was actually living was the one that required both of them in the frame. The Morgan family today includes grandchildren. The channel that started in 2016 with a camera pointed at a woodpile is approaching its 10th year of continuous content. The woman who earned a nickname for the consistency of her physical work is still doing that work on that property, in front of that camera. One phone call, one conversation. That's all it took to change the direction of everything. Morgan's Off the Leash is easy to overlook because its subscriber numbers never match the reach of the main channel. But the content it produced reveals things about Melissa Morgan that the main channel's format was never built to surface. The fitness content, real-time, largely unedited, filmed in a gym, demonstrated a level of physical discipline that extended well beyond what viewers saw in firewood and farm videos. Melissa wasn't just physically capable in the context of outdoor work. She was specifically trained, with a consistent practice that continued regardless of what the main channel was filming that week. That kind of discipline, documented on a channel with a fraction of the main audience, says something about character that doesn't show up in subscriber counts. The travel content showed a different dimension entirely. The trip through Las Vegas and on to San Diego and Coronado, California, wasn't packaged as a sponsored series or framed as a brand event. It was Melissa moving through spaces categorically different from rural Pennsylvania, airports, city streets, beaches, and documenting that movement as someone genuinely curious about the contrast, rather than performing enjoyment of it. That curiosity was real. The footage made it visible. The Meet the Morgans series was perhaps the most revealing content on the entire channel. Melissa designed a format where each family member was formally introduced, questions answered, individual character given space to surface, context provided for viewers who might be arriving without years of main channel history behind them. That is a structural decision. It reflects a specific understanding of how documentary content works, how audiences build connection with subjects, and what makes a family-based channel feel like more than a collection of people who happen to share a property. That's not instinct alone. That's craft, applied with intention. What it all adds up to is a portrait of a creator who had more to say than the main channel's format gave her space to say. She found that space, she used it. And the fact that she returned her full attention to what she and Mike built together suggests not a retreat from ambition, but a choice made from genuine clarity about what she was actually doing and why. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Melissa Morgan's story sits inside a question that the rural YouTube space hasn't fully worked out how to answer. What does a woman do with her own creative identity when it was built, from the very first video, inside a channel that carries someone else's name alongside hers? This isn't unique to the Morgans. Across family and rural YouTube, the same pattern appears again and again. A couple starts a channel together. It grows. Over time, the audience begins to associate the channel primarily with one face or one voice, not necessarily out of bias, but because the structural conventions of thumbnail design, title formatting, and algorithmic presentation tend to consolidate around a single anchor. The other partner becomes, in the audience's mental model, a supporting presence, even when they are doing equivalent or greater amounts of the actual work that the channel exists to document. Melissa's response to that dynamic was practical and direct. She didn't attempt to renegotiate the main channel's identity from within. She didn't introduce visible conflict into the partnership for the audience to watch and respond to. She built something parallel, her own channel, her own brand, her own community, and she ran it at the same time she was doing everything else. When she chose to return her full attention to the main channel, she made that choice from a position of experience. She knew what the alternative looked like because she had built it herself, not because she had imagined it. That distinction matters more than it might initially appear. Choosing something after having genuinely tried the alternative is a fundamentally different act than choosing it by default. It means the choice is informed. It means the person making it knows what they are giving up and has decided it is worth giving up. That is a harder, more honest commitment than simply staying because leaving never felt like a real option. The rural YouTube space is full of channels that launched with two people in the frame and gradually became one person's show over time, not through any single dramatic moment, but through the slow accumulation of editorial decisions and audience associations that end up centering one partner and marginalizing the other. What makes Outdoors with the Morgans different, and what Melissa's parallel chapter makes visible, is that the partnership at the center of it has remained genuinely mutual across nearly 10 years of continuous content. The channel still feels like both of them are choosing to be there. That quality, when it's real, is almost impossible to manufacture, and an audience that has been watching for years can always sense whether it is present or absent. Melissa Morgan didn't disappear. She didn't walk away, create public drama, or leave something behind that she couldn't control. What she did was quieter and more deliberate than any of that. She built a second identity. She ran it long enough to understand what it was and what it wasn't. She proved to herself that she could create independently, and then she came back to the partnership that had always been the real foundation, carrying that proof with her. The Morgans are still working, still filming, still building, with grandchildren in the picture now, and a business that moved through real financial pressure in 2024 and came out stronger on the other side. The channel that started with a camera pointed at a Pennsylvania woodpile in the summer of 2016 is heading into its 10th year with the same two people who were there at the beginning. The question for the comments is this: do you think Melissa was right to step back from Morgan's Off the Leash and return her full focus to the channel she and Mike built together? Or do you think she left something on that solo channel that's still worth coming back to?